And the stories I write are all very light, very fluffy. They're all with beautiful people who fall in love with each other, but there's always a problem until the end when they get together, of course. And in fact, there is no doubt when you start my stories and you meet the first two characters in it, that they are at the end going to be together, no matter what the problems appear to be. They hate each other on sight at the beginning, but I guarantee they'll be together by the end, because that's what these stories are like, all of them. And they're all written in the Regency period of English history, which is a very specific time that I'm going to talk about with a couple of slides in just a second. And people who read these Regency novels know that they know what to expect. It's very much a specific genre. And people recognize that there are certain idiosyncrasies of vocabulary and certain ways that things are expressed. And you expect that when you read my novels. If at the beginning it seems a bit odd, you pretty soon get used to it, because there's nothing that's difficult to understand at all in them. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical period, because it'll make it clearer. And then if we have time, I'll just read a little bit. But if any time you have a question, you know, feel free to ask. So I'm going to do a screen share now, and hopefully I'll get what I need here. Let me see. So, okay, here we have the Regency period is essentially from 1810 to 1830. Properly speaking, really, though, it starts earlier. It starts in 1790, when King George III was deemed unfit to rule because of mental defect. And he died in 1920. And during that period, so between, you could say, right at the end of the 1700s to 1820, the Prince Regent acted as monarch, so that's why it's called the Regency period. Then when George III finally died in 1820, his son became George IV, but he only lasted another 10 years, and that was until 1830. So when, by extension, it's not historically totally accurate in terms of when people lived and died, but the period tends to run from about 1800 to 1830. Anything in there is considered the Regency period. So George III is known, of course, to Americans because he lost the colonies. And in fact, that's referred to fairly often in the novels, as, you know, that, you know, George was so hopeless he couldn't even hang on to the colonies. He was, there he is, a picture of him wearing his very sumptuous outfits. He is known to Americans as the evil king who imposed taxes on the colonies to pay for the armies that controlled them, and caused the Boston Tea Party, was ultimately defeated. To British people, he's known as the Mad King, who had purple urine because he had porphyria, which some people think caused his mental defect, and that makes your urine go purple. And he once shook the branch of a tree, thinking it was the hand of the Prussian ambassador, which it's a shame, really, because he seems to have been quite a nice guy in his way, but he's mostly remembered for being pretty hopeless. His son, George IV, or the Regent, as he was initially, oh, sorry about that. There we go. Here's our Regent, and you'll notice immediately a difference between the two of them is that the George III is wearing a wig and this very kingly garb, whereas George IV, or the Prince Regent, as he is in this picture, is shown as a soldier. He's not wearing a wig. He has his hair done in a style which was called the Brutus style, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. He considered himself sort of one of the people. He liked to have parties. He was very fun-loving. and as unlike his father as could be. His father was faithful to his wife, whereas Prince Regent certainly wasn't. He was pleasure-loving, self-indulgent, dissolute. His father refused to pay his debts unless he married his cousin, Princess Caroline of Brunswick. But he had for some years had an unofficial wedding with Maria Fitzherbert, who was a Catholic and therefore ineligible to become his wife. He had 2 children by her, a daughter by Caroline, who was pregnant by him when they married, and he had other mistresses and probably other children. And he was the sort of character that sort of forms the background to this Regency period, because he was fun-loving. He wasn't faithful to his wife or his mistress, and he thought nothing was better than having a party. He had this in Brighton. You can still visit the pavilion there, which started out as a small summer palace when the Regent first went down to Brighton, but he very quickly had it built into this pleasure dome where he would hold the most extravagant parties. And these are often referred to in Regency novels in general. As I said, this is a sort of background to it. At the same time, the other background person that we probably should talk about is Napoleon, because although the British have always disliked the French, and still do, I must say, there's not much change there, the French court has always had an enormous influence on British fashion. And so here we have Napoleon when he became emperor, and he fancied himself very much as in the tradition of the great Greek heroes, and Hector and Achilles and so on. And he adopted a personal style that came to be called the Empire style, because he created the French Empire. And here he is shown on his imperial throne, and you will of course see that he's wearing the laurel crown here. His throne, you can see they've got deliberately got a bit of it showing here where it looks like a Corinthian column. He's wearing what looks like a toga with this frieze along the bottom. So even in his dress, you can see that he was demonstrating that he was in a tradition of very great heroes, very great warriors, and that's how he saw himself. He popularized for women, was popularized what we now still call the Empire line dress, which is the dress which is high under the bosom, straight and flowing. Of course, only before the period of Napoleon, of course, they were wearing these very large skirts, which were held up by wicker baskets. Essentially, they were wicker baskets. They were called paniers in French, and that's the word for basket. They held out the dresses very, very wide on both sides. I'm sure you've seen pictures of them or movies with them in, where they could hardly get through the door for the size of their skirts. The Empire style is altogether much more simple in terms of women's dress. Also, the sofa that she is on, this is Madame Récamier. She also had noticed she has a sort of a headband which imitates the laurel crown. She's on a sofa, which is still to this day called an Empire style sofa, with these type of curving back. The torchère here, very much in a sort of a Greek style of having some sort of flame lamp at the top here. So that is the style of clothing for women in all of the Regency books, not only mine, but anybody else's as well. This is a picture from the crowning of Napoleon. Just as an interesting sidebar, Napoleon wanted to differentiate himself from the previous kings of France. He called himself emperor, not king anyway. And he had himself crowned in Notre Dame Cathedral, as opposed to Reims Cathedral, which is where all the kings of France had been crowned. And this is a picture, a detail from a famous painting by Jacques-Louis David, who was the sort of royal painter of the Napoleonic era. And you'll notice again that the women are wearing, this one has actually got something that looks very much like a laurel crown on her head. The Empire style dresses, again, very high under the bosom and so on. And you'll notice the gentlemen all have this Brutus hairstyle. See, all were brushed forward onto their crown. Well, not this guy, I guess, but the ones that have hair. And that, if you remember back to the picture of the regent, the Prince Regent, he had that same Brutus hairstyle, which of course is an imitation of the Roman statues that have been in museums at that time and now. And again, it is a deliberate imitation of the classic period. And you see that, and so the gentlemen in my books always have this look. They wore these high collars. They were starched so that they stood up straight, and a neckcloth all around the outside. And the neckcloth came outside of the collar. You can see it here and there again. And the tying of the neckcloth was something which was considered a gentleman's absolute, an important part of his wardrobe. And again, in my books, you'll see that that's a sort of feature of the gentleman. So there we are. I just should tell you, by the way, and before getting out of these pictures, that I write under the name of G.L. Robinson, which is my maiden name, Glynis Louise Robinson. My first name is Glynis Louise. I'm always called Louise in America, and I'm called Glynis in England. And so to make it not too confusing, I just put GL and then Robinson. And I do have a website. If you just type in romance, you can put in the HTTPS if you want to, but you don't absolutely have to. You can just put romance novels by glrobinson.com, and you can listen to the first chapter of all of my novels, and I have published 7